What if one of the most daring secrets of the 20th century was hidden not in space, not in war, but in files sealed away in forgotten archives? Could it be that the real frontier wasn't the moon or the atom, but time itself? For decades, the public was told that government science pursued rockets, satellites, and computers. But in the shadows, another story flickers, a project that sought to bend distance, fracture chronology, and rewrite the rules of movement itself. They called it Pegasus. Some say it was nothing more than fantasy. Others insist it was the most dangerous experiment America ever attempted. The story begins with Nikola Tesla. When he died in 1943, officials quietly seized his papers. Most were dismissed as eccentric sketches, but a handful of diagrams hinted at something extraordinary. Energy fields, resonance patterns, even frames that looked suspiciously like gateways. Were these ideas mere speculation, or blueprints for a technology decades ahead of its time? To this day, no one can agree. Historians argue that Tesla was misunderstood. Conspiracy researchers claim the government built exactly what he imagined. The truth may lie in the silence between those voices. By the late 1950s, DARPA, then a new branch of the Pentagon, was tasked with ensuring the United States would never again be surprised by technology. Rockets, lasers, satellites, yes. But inside classified facilities, whispers say another file circulated. The possibility of teleportation, even time displacement. Outrageous? Absolutely. Yet the very act of considering it reveals how far the Cold War bent logic. If the Soviets tried to weaponize space and mind control, why wouldn't America test the limits of physics itself? Skeptics scoff. Supporters point to anomalies in budgets and reports that simply vanish. Is absence proof of absence, or evidence of a story too dangerous to confirm? Early trials were cautious, even timid. Engineers constructed chambers that hummed at the edge of human hearing. Volunteers stepped inside. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes the subjects emerged disoriented, reporting dizziness, whispers in their ears, or distortions in the air. On rare occasions, the results were catastrophic. Files hint at subjects who aged years in moments, or whose memories fractured into contradictions. Official science dismissed these as misreadings of stress and suggestion. But if they were harmless, why were the records buried so deep? Again and again, a theme emerged. Adults could not adapt. Their minds resisted. Their perceptions cracked. Instruments measured anomalies, but subjects reported trauma. Slowly, reluctantly, officials turned to a controversial conclusion. If this program was to continue, its candidates would need to be different, malleable, adaptable, less anchored to rigid perception. In other words, children, here the story shifts from scientific curiosity to ethical fault line. Who makes such a choice? Who consents on behalf of those too young to understand? The decision, according to whistleblowers, was justified by national security. The logic was simple. If chilling, a child's brain is flexible. Their imagination can tolerate what adult minds reject. What scientists call plasticity became the program's rationale. But critics argue this wasn't adaptation, it was exploitation. If the rumors are true, history's most fragile minds were placed at the threshold of experiments even seasoned adults could not survive. Is that innovation, or abuse wearing the mask of patriotism? Archives speak in fragments. A memo stamped confidential. A photograph of a nondescript desert facility. Budgets that spike in curious years. Diaries found decades later filled with sketches of tunnels and spirals, drawn by children supposedly enrolled in training camps. Evidence, or the projection of fear onto coincidence. Debate rages. Some researchers argue these artifacts prove nothing. Others claim they prove too much. And in this debate, one name always emerges: Andrew Basiago, who swears he was there. But before the whistleblowers, before the interviews, before Gettysburg and Mars and the myths that followed, there was only the origin story. Tesla's seized files, DARPA's ambition, CIA's secrecy, and a program cloaked in silence. These first 60 moments, the origins of Pegasus, are the foundation on which all later claims rest. Were these trials the first step toward mastering time, or the first step into a delusion dressed in science's clothing? The evidence divides even experts. Physicists argue the math is implausible. Engineers point to gaps in documentation. Historians say the timeline is too neat. Yet the contradictions themselves are revealing. Why do so many documents reference technologies that should not exist? Why do so many testimonies echo the same vocabulary of fields, tunnels, resonance? Are we hearing echoes of truth, or the repetition of a well-told myth? Secrecy, by its nature, invites imagination. Every locked cabinet, every redacted line, every blurred photograph whispers louder than it should. Was Pegasus real? Did children walk through corridors that bent time? Or was the project nothing more than Cold War theater, an expensive mirage designed to spook adversaries and inspire domestic awe? The answer, for now, lives not in certainty, but in the friction between belief and denial. And so, as the first act closes, the hook sharpens. If the origin story is true, then history must be rewritten to admit technologies long dismissed as impossible. If it is false, then why do so many traces, memos, testimonies, photographs still persist, unexplainable and unresolved? Perhaps the deeper question is not whether Pegasus worked, but whether it was attempted at all. Because if it was, then secrecy itself becomes the most profound experiment, an effort not just to bend time, but to bend memory. And if that's true, then we are all participants, living inside a story written in margins, erased in archives, and whispered back into life by those who cannot forget. What happens when curiosity outgrows conscience? In the files we traced before, the math was bold and the rooms were humming. Now the door opens on a quieter frontier, a classroom where the lesson plan is courage. The desks are small, the pencils blunt, and the diagrams on the board look like mazes of light. Instructors call it training. The children call it the door. Who decided they were ready? Who decided anyone could be? At first, it looks like ordinary school. A spelling list, a breathing exercise, a game with numbers that teaches rhythm more than arithmetic. But the rhythm isn't for music. It's for keeping a mind steady when the room tilts, when the seconds refuse to hold their shape. The drawings in the notebooks, tunnels, spirals, arches, are dismissed as doodles until the engineers notice how closely they trace the lab's resonance maps. Is imagination merely echoing suggestion? Or are the children reporting, in crayon, what adult language cannot yet admit? Discipline migrates from the page to the body. Drills in the gym, steps in unison, heartbeats synchronized by accident or design. Fitness, they say, is a hedge against panic. But the stronger lesson is posture. Eyes forward, breath even, silence kept. Somewhere along the line, adaptability becomes a grade. The measure isn't strength, it's flexibility, the grace to bend without breaking when the environment argues with sense. Night exposes what the reports cannot. In the dorms, whispers braid into folklore. The door again. The blue light. The old soldiers. A child clutches a toy as if it were a compass. Another tears a page from a journal rather than let anyone read what she wrote. Adults review the biometrics, sleep disruption, cortisol spikes, and call it stress. The camera lingers on small hands and trembling lips and asks a harder question. Is this adaptation, or is it damage wearing a patient face? Trials arrive with the cleanliness of protocol. Platforms glow. Grids hover. The hum deepens until it's felt more than heard. Seconds expand like breath held too long, then collapse like a chest emptying too fast. Sometimes nothing happens except fear. Sometimes something happens that the data agrees with, a flicker at the edge of a child's outline, a displacement measured in centimeters, and disbelief. Again, a voice says, and you hope it's an operator. It isn't. It's the child, repeating the word like a password she didn't choose. Evidence is a terrible negotiator. It wants either too much or too little. In one lab, a sketch taped to a wall hints at a battlefield no child was taught to name. In another, a faded photograph from 1863 contains a blurred boy who looks like every frightened child, because every frightened child looks the same. Coincidence is generous. Proof is unforgiving. Between them, programs learn to survive. They translate doubt into procedure, cost into line items, suffering into charts that make senior officials nod. Doctors try to be the conscience of the enterprise. Their charts speak in the soft grammar of care, sleep cycles, appetite, headaches. They recommend rest days and quieter lights. Then the schedule tightens. Then the schedule wins. Some write notes they never file. Some file notes they wish they had never written. All of them are trapped in the oldest argument in science. If we stop now, the truth we've paid for will never be learned. If we continue, the debt will come due in lives that trusted us. The children learn a new language. Countdowns, thresholds, hold steady. Almost there. They also learn a silence that adults mistake for bravery. Survival here is not refusal. It's agreement. To stand still on a platform that shudders like an animal, to accept the way air can feel like water, to treat vertigo as a grade to be improved. The program calls this resilience. The narration calls it the courage of the cornered. Whistleblowers drift in at the edges, voices bent by time and fear. They speak of early failures, of adults who couldn't keep the room still inside their heads, of a pivot no ethics board would sign, unless the board was secrecy itself. The testimonies conflict on detail and converge on tone. Pride and remorse sit side by side. They say the results were repeatable. They never say the cost was acceptable. And then the word no one wanted, validation. The instrument panels stop arguing with the eyes. A child flickers and returns. The coordinate log agrees. Seconds run long and short. The graphs confess the same stutter. Youth adaptability indices. The slides declare, sanctifying what should have remained a warning with the cool authority of numbers. A room full of officials claps politely. Somewhere else, a child stares at the ceiling until dawn because sleep demands trust, and trust is the one thing the chamber took. We visit the archives again, and the boxes look heavier now. Redactions multiply like shields. A project name appears and disappears in the same paragraph, as if a sentence couldn't bear the weight of what it contained. Is secrecy protecting breakthroughs, or burying sins? Perhaps both. The most dangerous inventions are two-headed. They promise mastery and invite denial. Pegasus, if it existed, learned to ride both. Instructors continue to rehearse courage. Breathe in 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Engineers recalibrate the hum. Administrators adjust the story. Parents, when they appear in this narrative at all, hover in rumor, in signatures acquired under pressure, in the fog that always hangs where national security meets consent. The narrator asks the only honest question left. When did necessity become certainty? The room offers no reply but the drone of machines earning their funding. The second act ends not with triumph, but with an inventory. We have notebooks filled with spirals and doors, logs that insist time can be persuaded, photographs that look like rumors, and rumors that look like photographs, doctors who swallow their objections, officials fluent in budgets and silence, children who did what they were taught and paid in nights they cannot get back. What precisely was accomplished? What precisely was broken? The next chapter will claim destinations, names like Gettysburg and places farther still. But before the where, we sit with the who. Because if adults built a threshold, children carried it. So the question we bring from part 1 turns sharper here. Did Pegasus pioneer a passage, or manufacture a belief so persuasive that reality adjusted to accommodate it? If the first, the world we know stands on the edge of a revolution we are unprepared to confess. If the second, then we have proven not that time yields, but that conscience does. Either way, the result is the same. A generation taught to keep their footing while the floor moves, a country taught to clap for charts, and a story that refuses to stay buried. What began as a rumor in chalk and wire becomes, here, an argument with distance itself. The file name changes, the room does not. Same steel, same hum. Pegasus is no longer only a question about time. It has started asking where. Memos arrive with the tone of inevitability. Expansion directive, transit module, jump room protocol. The language is precise and evasive, a dialect that lets a person do something extraordinary while claiming to have done nothing at all. Outside, the desert keeps its oath of silence. Inside, a panel labeled with a symbol replaces the comfort of a floor number. The children return as constant as the hum. Their drawings begin to change. The spirals remain, but the sky in the pictures reddens, the horizon flattens, and small figures draw themselves smaller still beneath 2 suns that no teacher assigned. In debriefs, a whisper repeats, red sky, thin air, cold, phrases a doctor could file under stress but a historian cannot ignore. Are these memories, simulations, or the strange compost made when imagination is fed instruction? Officials insist on discipline and call it safety. The elevator, if that is what it is, accepts a key and a breath held too long. The room vibrates in the chest like a second heartbeat. There is no view out the door, only the suggestion that doors are an Earth habit. The data starts misbehaving in useful ways. Coordinates labeled extraterrestrial. Pressure traces that don't flatter lungs used to sea-level life. A child describes dust that sits in the mouth like metal. Another draws a mesa that matches, too neatly, an orbital image on a screen 3 rooms away. Skeptics declare contamination and cannot be dismissed. Believers declare convergence and cannot be ignored. The truth, as usual, lives in the middle distance where caution and wonder trade custody of the same facts. In a dark auditorium, a slide reads, "Habitable corridor." The phrase is careful. It promises nothing and implies everything. What if the project hasn't built a highway but found a footpath, thin, unstable, dangerous, but real, between here and a place that once belonged only to telescopes? If such a path existed, who should walk it? Who already has? And why do the youngest witnesses sound the oldest when describing what they saw? Tesla's name resurfaces like a tide mark. Diagrams from decades ago echo in the new machines. Coils and frames and notes scribbled with the stubborn confidence of a mind that refused the word impossible. Some call it romantic mythology. Others call it continuity. The idea that ideas wait for the right conditions to bloom. The chalkboards of the past have grown into the consoles of the present, and the stakes are no longer theoretical. We watch technicians argue with the rig in a grammar of light. A child's outline ripples and then reasserts itself, like a reflection convinced back into the mirror. When the door opens, breath fogs a visor that shouldn't be foggy. The medic on duty writes anxiety, then crosses it out and writes resolved. Language always trails the event. Evidence proliferates without becoming proof. A photo of a mesa with unapologetic right angles. A fragment of film that hints more than it shows. A chart with too many redactions to comfort anyone. Meanwhile, testimony multiplies. Towers. Machines. Coal. The program grows heavier with what it knows and lighter with what it admits. Scientists divide into camps that are less enemy than mirror. One group warns against pareidolia and projection. Another points out that patterns have their own stubbornness. The debate feels less like physics than like theology. Everyone agrees on one truth. If the path exists, it is narrow. If it fails, the failure will be personal. Historians chase footnotes through archive stacks, holding pages to the light like relics. They find a word the marker almost, but not quite, erased, transit. The children become the center of gravity again. Their debriefs read like prayers to a place no one knows how to bless. Red sand. Far cliffs. No birds. A public debate staggers into view. A panel titled, "Impossible versus Irrefutable," draws a crowd not because people love certainty, but because they crave permission to wonder. On stage, skeptics quote thermodynamics. Advocates quote telemetry. Outside, 2 protest signs pass each other like ships, one demanding answers, the other demanding restraint. Both make the same accusation: you know more than you're saying. Back in the lab, someone arranges clippings into a timeline. The board looks like conspiracy until it looks like history, a collage of decisions made by people with payrolls and private doubts. Then there are the empty rooms. A decommissioned chamber collects dust like a verdict. Cables hang like vines reclaiming a ruin. Is silence proof of failure, or the first requirement of success? Finally, the affidavits. Ink on paper, hands that tremble because hands know what voices sometimes refuse. I saw. I was there. Again. Lawyers argue over classification while children age into adults who measure their nights in distances no map will print. So part 3 ends where our courage and our doubts meet on the lip of a red horizon. If Pegasus has threaded a corridor between here and elsewhere, thin, precarious, and cruelly dependent on the minds of those least prepared to carry it, then our species has already crossed a line without telling itself. If not, then we have taught a generation to live inside a story only secrecy could sustain. Either way, the ledger is not balanced. The next pages will ask whether the path leads to ruins or to warnings, to a past we misread or a future we're not ready to inherit. We set the camera down and listen to the room breathe. It sounds like distance narrowing or like conscience catching up. What happens when the only people willing to speak are the ones least likely to be believed? The late-night airwaves become a confessional, a frequency for the restless and the haunted. A host leans toward the mic, voice low, inviting callers to step out of the dark carrying fragments. A corridor that hummed, a room that forgot which way was forward, a child who said again, like a request and a warning. Are these stories the noise floor of a culture obsessed with secrets, or the echo of something history can't quite smother? I was there, a voice says on the air, then apologizes for a memory that's been filed and refiled in a mind that trusts itself, except at night. Why risk everything for a story no judge is asked to hear? Because silence, the witness says, keeps getting heavier. Across town, archivists chase ghosts patiently, methodically. Boxes bloom from shelves, their lids popping like time capsules. Inside, memos with the heart cut out, budgets with numbers that jump like bad EKGs, photos that prove nothing except that someone thought they might. A historian traces a boy's blurred outline in a faded Civil War print. Coincidence that returns like a chorus starts to sound like design. Ruins help. Desert wind scours an old foundation that once wore a name, then an acronym, then a code. Investigators arrive with cameras and caution, mapping absence. The footage is unspectacular and devastating. Concrete, rust, silence. Real revelations show up wearing dust. A press conference, then. A microphone on a shaking lapel, papers plastered with redaction bars, questions hurled like ropes. Did you see children? Did you sign off on trials? The researcher at the podium refuses the words victim and hero, then says the one word everyone understands. Again, the room inhales. This is how truth leaks. Messy, undramatic, cumulative. Film stutters to life in a dark screening room. Figures move inside a chamber that official history denies exists. A child hesitates, then obeys. White light washes everything sterile. The projector clicks, swallows a frame, returns it scarred. Scholars argue over provenance. Activists argue over conscience. No one argues about the feeling in the gut. Debate becomes sport in auditoriums where certainty is a performance. A slide titled Implausible earns applause. Another titled Unexplained earns a silence that speaks louder. Are we measuring belief, or measuring our fear of being caught believing the wrong thing? Outside, crowds assemble with signs sharp as verdicts. Open the files. Where are the children? Protest is another kind of archive. It saves the part of a story that institutions decline to store. In court, the choreography is rigid. A judge frowns at a page and sees not words but a policy question with a flag planted in the middle: national security. Justice doesn't vanish. It just waits at the far end of a hallway whose lights have been dimmed. Classified, someone says, like a spell that ends the conversation precisely when it matters most. An editor in a gray newsroom widens a headline: Strange Science at DARPA. The article never says Pegasus, only projects, exploratory, and questions remain. It's forgotten by Friday, except by the people who do not plan to forget. They clip, circle, annotate, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. And always, the voices. A tape recorder trembles on a desk. Reels turn. Door. Light. Again. A different voice, older now, says the one word that carries consequence. Children. The room seems to tilt. If you have ever cataloged a library of grief, you know the sound of someone who told the truth in the only room that would listen. The Academy tries to metabolize the legend. A professor sketches a corridor on a chalkboard and calls it metaphor. A student raises a hand and asks, what if the metaphor is literal? Laughter, then discomfort, then a break for coffee. In the hallway, a small cluster stays behind, talking in low voices about anomalies that refuse to retire. Ideas travel fastest when they are almost safe to say. Budgets testify with the cool candor of numbers. Ledger lines swell and constrict in the exact years no one remembers with precision. Money leaves footprints where words refuse to tread. Follow them long enough, and you find a locked door, a demolition order, a contractor who won't take calls. The fourth act swells toward a collective realization. Maybe documents are not the only archive. Landscapes keep their own minutes in wind and light. One afternoon, a team screens degraded film again with software that coaxes contour from static. The image sharpens a fraction. A figure inside the chamber turns, so young, and in that fractional clarity the room forgets to breathe. Proof? Not in any court. But something harder to dismiss has arrived: recognition. If people who risk their reputations to remember are our least credible witnesses, then the machinery of secrecy has already succeeded. If the only stable facts are that certain files exist and are not for us, then we have learned exactly what secrecy wanted us to learn: our place. And still, the questions insist. Why do so many fragments rhyme? Why do so many records falter exactly where human cost begins? If the corridors were fantasy, why build rooms sturdy enough to contain them? We close this chapter with a stubborn truth. Silence is not neutral. It is engineered, budgeted, and forced. But memory is stubborn, too. It leaks through talk radio and court transcripts, through campus debates and street chants, through mothers who kept drawings and archivists who keep lists. The ledger is still unbalanced. Whether Pegasus was science unchained or myth refined by terror, the afterimage remains. A threshold crossed by people who could not afford to fall, and a world that may never admit how far they went. History does not end, it accumulates. It stacks itself in libraries and hard drives, in footnotes and feeds. When the doors of Act 5 open, we find memory already at work. Researchers lean over tables where clippings lie like fallen leaves. The hum that carried us from rumor to red horizon now returns, rerouted through public space. Once, secrecy defined the narrative. Now the narrative resists. The first lesson of legacy is domestic, a person drawing lines between fragments that never planned to meet. A declassified paragraph breathes again when paired with a child's drawing of two suns. A ledger spike that once hid inside a budget becomes loud when read alongside a memo stamped expansion. The story is not solved, it is surfaced. Outside, streets take the shape of a classroom. Banners claim the vocabulary institutions refuse: truth, memory, children. Candlelight turns crowds into a single organism, breathing, patient, unwilling to forget. Secrecy once owned the silence. The public now owns the echo. Museums, cautious by design, enter carefully. A framed notebook fills with drawings of corridors and red skies. The label uses neutral words: artifact, testimony, disputed, but the glass still vibrates with implication. What does it mean when innocence becomes evidence? When evidence becomes heritage? Perhaps it means that truth has more than one museum, one made of walls and one made of people. In lecture halls, a different ritual plays out. Slides proclaim myth and evidence like rival dynasties. A historian marks patterns that return too neatly. A physicist warns that correlation is not causation. A philosopher asks whether ethics should precede capability. None of them settle the matter. All of them keep it honest. This is the second lesson of legacy. Debate is not the opposite of truth. It is the keeper of it. Back in the archives, an old reel wakes. Software fills scars with pixels faithful enough to hurt. A shoulder turns. A small posture hardens. A room of adults watching in the present inhales as one. Not proof for court, perhaps. Proof for conscience, undeniably. We have learned by now that conscience has its own standards of evidence. Cities answer with art. A wall becomes a horizon. Corridors arc across brick. Silhouettes of children step toward a reddened distance. Murals are declarations the weather cannot redact. They make a third museum out of public view. In this feedback loop, memory becomes infrastructure. The camera tracks across vigils and symposiums, across basements where boxes yield their stubborn contents. A pattern repeats. The facts remain partial, the feelings complete. We remember, a crowd whispers. Again, a witness says, and the word that once measured procedure becomes a theology of persistence. There is pain in these rooms, but there is also a profound recalibration. Power once defined reality by keeping it secret. Now reality keeps power honest by refusing to be quiet. What of Mars, the red horizon that tempted and terrified? The film does not pretend to settle celestial cartography. It records that a generation learned to imagine distance differently. Children taught the world a harder measure, that the cost of a leap is never just measured in miles, but in nights. Ethics steps forward at last, late but unignorable. The question follows us out of every room. What do we owe those whose lives became the bridge between secrecy and discovery? The only currency that spins in both past and future is vigilance. Policies written in light. Processes that remember they are about people first. The narrative widens to include the unglamorous heroes. The archivist who refuses to misfile the uncomfortable. The reporter who underlines the boring line that turns out to be the hinge. The teacher who lets a difficult conversation take the whole period. The parent who keeps a box of drawings against the day someone will ask. Their names will not trend. Their work will outlast the trend. Legacy also means accepting ambiguity without surrendering curiosity. The film returns, one last time, to the empty chamber. Rust, dust, a geometry of absence. Once, this room promised an answer. Now it offers a question sturdy enough to live inside. How should a free society treat secrets that tempt it with wonder and threaten it with harm? We do not answer with certainty. We answer with process, sunlight, oversight, humility, and a clause that says, because we can is never sufficient. The final montage parades street and campus, archive and home. A child in a gallery presses a hand to glass. A professor erases and rewrites a diagram. A protester shields a candle from wind. A historian closes a file, but not the question. The narrator's voice is steady now. Institutions forget when they must. Memory survives because it has help. Banners, posts, tapes, murals. The mediums differ. The message converges. Whether Pegasus was a corridor through time to a red horizon, or a corridor through fear into the public square, it changed the shape of what we dare to ask. So we end where all true endings begin, with responsibility. If secrecy can shape memory, then only participation can shape history. Ask better questions. Demand better oversight. And when a child draws a door on a page, do not rush to name it fantasy or fact. Ask where it leads, and whether we deserve to follow. The projection fades to a field of dim stars. The low hum that haunted the early labs returns, softer now, a frequency transformed from threat into reminder. We hold on the empty screen just long enough to hear what earlier rooms drowned out. Breath. Ours. The film has no final verdict, only an insistence that truth is a verb, something we do together. In the end, the corridor that matters is not hidden in a building or buried in a budget. It is the passage from silence to speech, from rumor to record, from private memory to public care. Step carefully. Step bravely. Step together.